I am just realizing I was talking on mute. Welcome everybody to the show. Welcome to Nerdstalgia. Joining me tonight is Rich. We are going to be discussing real masterclass of a movie, Antman and the Wasp, Quantumania. How you doing tonight, Rich?
Oh, I'm fantastic. Can't wait to disagree with you.
Okay, interesting, because it's funny. Normally we talk more before this, and we did not have much dialogue after seeing this. So it's certainly going to be interesting to see. I'm interested in what your opinion is going to be.
Yeah, I mean, realistically, I'm mostly joking. We're probably probably pretty aligned on a lot of things. I know you definitely did not care for the movie at all. I did think it had some redeeming qualities to it, but certainly not a great start to Phase 5. Overall disappointing, but I guess tonight I'm going to be playing the role of defending Quantumania, as it were.
Okay. All right.
And I have my work cut out for me, I know.
I mean, I guess for me, like, so what were your initial thoughts? I mean, because obviously as time goes on, when you see a movie, you have kind of your knee-jerk reaction right off the bat, where my first reaction was basically like, this was terrible. Like, what are they doing?
I mean, I'm gonna need to see it again for sure to let it all.
You are?
Yeah. I mean,
not in the theater.
I usually do, and I probably will for Quantumania as well. Certainly not going to run out and see it again tomorrow, but I probably will see it again in theaters, just to kind of give it a second look for sure.
Okay.
As I mentioned on the podcast last week, Antman, favorite comic book character. This goes back, to my childhood, long before MCU. So, I've been personally, vested in this character and very much looking forward to Quantumania, not only as a kind of new beginning for the MCU as a whole, but also as Ant-Man and the Wasp as, their individual characters and respective franchise.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I was hyped as you could possibly be for this movie. I mean, kicking off Phase 5, I mean, say what you want about Phase 4. There was definitely some ups and downs. There was definitely some pieces to Phase 4 that I really enjoyed, and others where I felt they could have done better. And it just seemed a little disjointed. So I guess for me, I was kind of hoping for Quantumania to just be more than it was.
Same, for sure.
Yeah,
don't get me wrong. It was definitely, a disappointing outing.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at previous phases, right? Like Phase 1, you kind of had, that was just the MCU kind of, I don't even think they knew it was Phase 1 at that point. They were just making movies. You know what I mean? This grand plan hadn't even been put, pen to paper at that point. But then Phase 2, you kind of had a lot of the individualized stories, right? So you had like the Iron Man 2, you had Thor doing his thing, you had Captain America. Everyone, you kind of had some of these started to cross over a little bit, and then you got introduced at the very end, I believe, of Phase 2 to Thanos, right?
Let's see. I think his first real appearance was in Guardians.
Guardians was Phase 2, right? Or was that Phase 3? No, end of Phase 2, I believe.
I think Phase 2, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, you kind of started to have that introduction into that next big bad. And then Phase 3, obviously, we know what happened there. I mean, everything came together. It was really the kind of the Infinity Saga from that point. So, for me, it kind of, I guess, I gave Marvel a pass, or Marvel Studios a pass, I guess, during Phase 4, thinking like, okay, it's a little disjointed. Everything is kind of going their separate ways. They're building these new characters with Shang-Chi. They introduced us to the Eternals. They did what they did with Spider-Man No Way Home as just kind of fan service, which was fantastic, by the way. But then I kind of expected the kickoff to phase 5 would be an introduction into the next big bad, which we did get.
It was, and almost to a fault.
Yeah.
I mean, it was, Kang the movie.
Yeah.
Which isn't necessarily a bad thing. So, and I think that's, you kind of touched on it already. It's Marvel kind of shooting themselves in the foot. It's a double-edged sword. So, they're planning, like 2-3 phases out at this point, but and that works to some degree. But then, you're also losing the more intimate stories, like the Ant-Man franchise, in the MCU has always been, he's always kind of been a little bit of an outlier. The movies themselves haven't been too connected to the greater MCU. At its core, the Ant-Man movies have previously been, more about family and friendship.
Yeah.
And we certainly lost most of that. I mean, one of the I think things that worked the best was the father-daughter dynamic.
Oh, absolutely.
But there was all of Scott Lang's friends that were missing from this movie.
Yep.
Cassie's mother and stepfather, all these ancillary characters that, we formed a relationship over with the past 2 movies, completely thrown out the window, all for kind of the greater MCU. Clearly this movie was meant to introduce Kang, meant to kind of springboard phase 5 and beyond, but we sacrifice the more personal stories of the title character here.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. You bring up a good point there, a lot of good points in what you just stated. So let me ask you this. Do you think it was the right move to introduce Kang in this big way? Obviously, we saw a taste. We got a taste of Kang at the end of Loki season 1. So like this isn't his debut necessarily, but this is kind of Kang Prime's debut. Was it the right move for Ant-Man to be the hero going against Kang here? I mean, that's where I'm kind of questioning things.
Yeah. So, I don't think it was necessarily the wrong decision. I think the execution misfired.
Okay.
At some point they needed to introduce him as this big threat.
Yep.
Probably sooner the better, right?
Yep.
So that way you have this common thread throughout the next couple phases. So I don't necessarily think it was too early, or Ant-Man was the wrong movie. Again, just the execution,
Okay.
And just in case the viewers haven't seen it, this is a full spoiler cast here, so we are going to be divulging major plot points and how the movie concluded.
Yep.
Which is what I want to bring up. At the end of the movie, it after another bright point, the final fight scene between Ant-Man and Kang, which I thought was well done. Ant-Man pretty soundly defeats Kang. So you have Ant-Man defeating Kang, who is supposed to be the next big bad, the next Avengers level threat. It doesn't
feel
bode well for Kang. Yeah,
it didn't feel right.
The stakes didn't seem high enough. At the very least, I was expecting a major death, whether that be Hank or Janet. That didn't happen. Everybody kind of walks off with a happy ending.
Yep.
So in that regard, it definitely didn't, in my eyes, stick the landing. It was too happy of an ending, too upbeat.
Yeah, and Bagel Cookie says didn't feel like a Thanos level threat, and I
Not at
tend
all.
to agree. We're like, there were pieces, there were moments in that movie, right, where especially when Kang finally suited up and got out there and with the glowing face and just started taking people out, I'm like, okay, here it comes. This is what we need right here. And I was almost rooting for him to just annihilate everybody at that point.
Right, which didn't happen. I mean, he
Didn't
essentially
happen.
got
Instead,
beaten by
by ants.
these weirdos in the quantum realm, and a bunch of ants.
Ants. I mean,
So I mean, we could do a whole episode just on the plot holes in this movie. But that certainly is one of them. Another is that here's this guy from the future, like 10 centuries into the future, who has presumably technology beyond our comprehension. And essentially he's kind of hamstrung by the fact that the battery in his car is dead.
Yeah. And that's my issue. I mean, here's the thing. Let's talk about, before I get into what I want to get into here to piggyback off of what you just said. What do you think this movie did well? What did you like?
So Kang, I mean, aside from kind of the plot shortcomings that we just discussed, Jonathan Majors is fantastic.
He is.
I have no doubt that they are going to make him out to be a Thanos level threat. It didn't quite land that way in this movie, but I have no doubt that he will be able to embody that kind of that villain that's just going to destroy the multiverse without any hesitation. So I thought his performance was fantastic, which I fully expected. Also, Michelle Pfeiffer, I thought she did a fantastic job.
She did.
I mean, she's always great. The name of the movie was Antman, Wasp, Quantumania. You assume that it was going to be the Hope character Wasp that they're going to focus on, but it wasn't. It was Janet's Wasp, which is fine with me. I am a fan of Hank Pym and Janet Pym from the comics. They were the original Ant-Man and Wasp, so I was happy to see that character
where she called him Ant-Man. That's the first time that he's been referred to as far as I know, on camera, like Hank Pym as Ant-Man, which I thought was kind of cool.
So and I don't think she has gotten her due in the MCU. Just the Wasp character as a whole. I won't go into too much nerdy detail because I could, but some quick comic history. The Wasp character, she was a founding member of the Avengers. In fact, she was the character that named the Avengers.
Really?
It was her. Yes, in the comics, she was the one that suggested the name the Avengers, and really has played very much a kind of a side role in the MCU to many other characters. So it was kind of nice to see her get the spotlight this go around.
Another piece that I enjoyed, and it's funny because when you read the Rotten Tomatoes reviews prior to going in, you see, this is wrong. The CGI is bad. I didn't have a problem with the effects. Like, I thought the effects were better than I was expecting them to be after reading these reviews. Let's put it that way. Like, could some of the scenes have been better? Sure. But overall, I don't think there was anything glaring that made me go, what's going on here with these special effects?
So I thought for the most part, the effects were fantastic. The quantum realm, really cool landscapes and world building there.
Had a Star Wars vibe. Had a very
absolutely
vibe when they were in that first area of the bar with Bill Murray. I loved it.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I have talked to several people, and that was their first. It's like, this feels like kind of a cross between Star Wars and Guardians of the Galaxy.
Yeah, it did.
The one glaring effects issue that I had was MODOK, or rather, when MODOK, Darren Cross, lifts his visor and he's just this giant chode-like head. uh, you know, like I don't
It
know.
didn't look
I
right.
thought
It didn't
it,
look
it
right.
it did not look good.
No.
And they had Modoc with his visor up, you
Hmm.
know, most of the movie. When the visor is down, I thought it looked pretty cool.
Yeah.
But it just
That's the
when he
thing. You
has
go from
this
such
big
a
human
high.
face, it kind of just like took you
Yeah, you go
out of
from
the
a high
moment.
to a low because when you first hear the acronym laid out, right, and you're like, oh, Modoc, that's right, we're gonna see Modoc. They introduce you to Modoc. You see him, and you're like, oh man, like that is
He
badass.
looks
I love
cool.
him.
Yeah,
And when that visor comes up, it's like it was over. From then on, it
yeah.
was over. It was gone. And from that
Well,
to showing his naked ass when they're dropping him into the suit, and
yeah.
the whole
Well,
thing was just so
it,
awful as far as
that
Modoc. Oh, I
that is
hated it.
probably one of my biggest criticisms of the movie, Modoc.
Yeah,
I think they completely wasted that character, which is unfortunate because in the comics, Modoc is on his own an
yep,
Avengers level threat.
yeah,
In this movie, he was relegated to a comic relief sidekick.
yeah.
Um, it, you
Even
know,
down to his last lines in the movie.
yeah,
Like,
it was
what are we
just
doing here? Like,
yeah, it was the Ant-Man movies have always had a little juvenile humor to them. That's kind
sure,
of been one of their charms, but
but
I think
they didn't
with the
land.
Modoc character it went too far.
They didn't land this time. I feel like a
No,
lot of times that juvenile humor works, but I feel like
right.
I didn't feel that they landed in this movie at
No.
all. Maybe that, I don't know.
And I think the Modoc character in this movie was kind of the embodiment of that, of
Yeah.
what went wrong.
Hmm.
The completely wasted character. I mean, he could have in his own right been, the villain, the main villain in, several MCU movies.
Oh yeah.
In the comics, he's the head of AIM, which,
Yep.
we saw at Iron Man 3. They introduced AIM.
Hmm.
At the time, Aldrich Killian
Yep.
uh, was the head of AIM, but in the comics, Modoc eventually becomes head of AIM, which
Yep.
is, a major player.
Which
So
there
yeah,
was no reference to
wasted
at all,
character.
no connection, no
Yeah.
reference, no connection to Modoc. It made no sense to me. And Marvel has actually done this in the past. I should say Marvel Studios has done this in the past, where you introduce us to a villain in one movie, and they die in the same movie,
Right.
and it's someone that you may have been excited to see. You know what I mean? I mean, look at Ronan in the first Guardians. Like,
He's the first one that came to
yeah,
mind.
and
Yeah.
it's like, why give us a villain to have him perish in the same movie?
Right.
I mean,
Because at this point they're just name dropping. They're
yeah,
trying to shoehorn
yep,
names. They're like, oh wow, here's that character that I recognize from the comics. But
yeah,
then you get over that initial excitement and you're like, what a waste. Like
yeah.
this isn't the character that I know.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
And now it's done. So
Right.
now it's off the table. So
I
you
mean,
can't.
realistically, like nothing's ever over in the MCU, but right, the chances that that they're gonna somehow bring him back, not likely.
No. And that's not to just. I kind of had a feeling this was going to be like a straight up bitch sesh about the movie. I thought you were supposed to be defending, but man, I'll tell you, that's one of the other issues is you mentioned anything's possible in the MCU, right? Nothing is ever done. That's a problem. That's a huge
Right.
problem. And that brings me
Right.
to, again, spoiler alert, the end of the movie where Kang dies or seems to have died, which
Right.
obviously we know he went into some other, I think he went into that similar style device that Cassie made and ends up on Earth 616. That's my
Well,
personal opinion.
well, I mean that's I mean essentially that would be the reverse of what happened to
Yeah.
Darren Cross in the
Right.
first movie, and he ended up being Modoc.
Mhm.
Right. So it's essentially the same mechanism, and
Yeah.
I've heard a lot of people theorize that that's what happened, and that's probably exactly what's going to
Yeah.
happen.
And I'm cool with that piece. My problem is, when they introduced the multiverse and they started this with the low key series. I'm not hating on the low key series because it was great. but the slippery slope that Marvel Studios has kind of gone down here is that when you have multiple versions of the same character, for instance, the post-credit scene, right?
Yeah.
You've got a situation where there's 30,000 Kangs in
So
that Coliseum, and I know the comic series it's from. I
yeah.
get it,
So,
but
so that is pretty comic accurate. But go ahead.
it is comic accurate. But my issue with it is it devalues Kang the character, and it devalues Doctor Strange, for instance, back in the Multiverse of Madness. It devalued Loki, in my opinion, when there's multiple Lokis, because if one of them dies, well, big deal. Like, they're not gone. We're going to see that actor.
Gamora.
Yeah.
Gamora and Guardians. So,
Yeah.
and that's a bigger issue with just comics as a whole. Death is never permanent. And, that was always, when I read comics when I was younger, was always a big issue, because they would kill off, they'd make a big deal, make a whole event, focused around, the death of some major character.
Yes.
But the stakes were never real, because you knew that in 2-3 years time, that character was somehow going to be resurrected.
Yeah.
Yep. I mean, just off the top of my head, I mean, Scott Lang, he was killed in the comics. Hawkeye killed in the comics. Wolverine, yep. I mean, he had a permanent death in the comics. Yeah. Everyone has died in the comics, and then they're eventually brought back.
Yep.
And I guess it kind of works in the comics. I always had an issue
more
with
in the comic book than it does in the MCU. And
right. In the cinematic universe, it works even less.
It does.
Right? And because people are already talking about, oh, well, is, Robert Downey Jr. coming back as Iron Man? And, I hope he doesn't. I mean, as great as he is, and as fantastic as he made that character, it would really cheapen everything, especially what has happened in the Spider-Man franchise. I mean, that is a big part of Tom Holland's Spider-Man.
Yep. I agree with that. And, I think I get it to an extent that, the stakes are what they are when you're talking about superheroes, right? Like, you're talking about comic book characters, you're talking about movies based off of comics. Like, I get it, the stakes are going to be lower, but I guess there's a difference to me between somebody dying and somehow resurrecting versus, well, somebody's dying, don't worry, there's 29,996 of them, and we'll just grab a different one from a different timeline. You know what I mean? That's what bugs me. And I understand, it's my understanding that this phase is going to be very, very multiverse centric.
I mean, it seems like that's what they've been kind of engineering that to happen.
And it just makes me nervous. That's all. I guess not only was I not thrilled with this movie in particular, but what I was kind of hoping for would be a post-credit scene that would kind of nudge me in a direction of optimism. And I didn't get that. I almost felt worse after seeing, like, oh man, like, we're going to be, it's now, an army of Kang. Okay. And, like, I don't know. I don't like the direction that we're heading. And I don't know, the title of the video here you're going to see is Marvel fatigue. I mean, maybe there's a piece of it. Maybe there's a little fatigue, MCU fatigue. I mean, we got a lot of content in the past year, between the series on Disney Plus. We got a lot of back-to-back movies. And I know some of that was due to COVID and timing and things like that, where they had to they push things out. And then we got kind of an overload of movies and shows at once. But I don't know if it's a combination of that or the direction in general, but I'm trying to stay optimistic, because I'm obviously, I'm a diehard Marvel fan and I want them to succeed, but it does make me a little nervous.
I mean, I think at some point, they're going to right the ship. I think, we're still in that kind of weird, like, I don't know, that phase 4 hangover, I guess, if you want to call it. I was really hoping that Antman was going to kind of brush that off and
just kick the doors open. Like, here we go. Phase 5 is here.
It didn't.
And it just didn't.
So,
It
I
didn't.
mean, it set up a lot of things going forward in the MCU, but which is fine. But again, it came at the sacrifice of the actual characters that the movie is named after,
Yeah.
which sucks.
Yeah.
Kang has ties to the Fantastic Four, to the
Mhm.
X-Men, the Avengers. So, I mean, they're clearly using this character as a thread to, introduce X-Men, to introduce Fantastic Four into the MCU, which are all very exciting things.
Oh, I cannot wait. I want it
I
now.
just,
I want it yesterday.
oh, absolutely.
You know?
Um, I wish that the MCU movies would take a little bit of a step back from the excessive world building and then just focus a little bit more on the individual stories,
Yeah.
that movie, that character, like how you were saying, phase one, phase two,
Yep.
that's pretty much
Develop.
all they
Just
were.
developing. Yeah.
Captain America, the Winter Soldier, that was a very intimate story, is Captain America and Bucky, and,
Yeah.
very, while it of course had ties to later Marvel movies and the Avengers as a whole, it was a, almost perfectly well contained movie, and can be enjoyed in its own right. If you were to watch Antman, the Wasp, Quantumania, and had no idea about anything that came before in the MCU or what was happening after, this movie would be a complete mess. You
Yeah.
wouldn't know what you were watching.
And not only would this movie be a complete mess, but let's say this movie never happened, right? Just it never happened. Does it change anything? Does anything change?
No, absolutely not.
And that's my
Because
problem. That's my
Kang would have been introduced in another way.
yeah.
Right.
Because as it is, he's just going to be reintroduced wherever he ended up. You know what I mean? Where when he went through that
100%.
portal. So
Yeah.
I guess for me, I'm shrugging my shoulders.
The movie is irrelevant in the greater
Yeah,
MCU.
totally irrelevant. And come on, Marvel, do better. You got Disney money. Okay, you got Disney money. You got
Well,
some of
and
the
I
greatest
think
minds
that may
film.
be part of the
Let's just stick
problem.
together.
I think they basically have a blank check, and I
They do.
think that's part of the issue. And I know we're going to touch on that on the main podcast
Yeah.
with some other properties.
Yep.
Another Disney property immediately comes to my head. Not that Star Wars has,
No, yeah.
not that they're there yet, but I very quickly see that franchise going in the same direction as the MCU. So
And we will continue that conversation
wait.
on the podcast tomorrow night. All right. So before we wrap it up, 1 through 10, I want a Dave Portnoy scale rating. Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania. What's your rating?
5.7.
Whew. It's a little high. A little high. I'm going with a 4.1.
And
And
it's harsh.
it is harsh. And
I respect it though.
4.1, and not only is it a 4.1, but I believe, and if I went through my rankings of all Marvel Studios movies, I believe that places Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania dead last.
I'd have to check where I've ranked everything else, but I think I still put Thor: Dark World and Iron Man 3 below it.
I do not.
We'll have to say ranking for another episode.
Give me Thor: Dark World. Give me Iron Man 3. Iron Man 3 underrated. I will leave you with that. Underrated.
No,
not great, but underrated. But that being said, that's our review. I wish we had more positive, exciting things to say. If you're thinking about going out, I mean, if you've watched this and you haven't seen it, then shame on you because we just spoiled multiple scenes for you. But maybe skip the theater for this one, catch it on Disney Plus. I don't even know as though I'm going to rewatch this movie. Maybe with my kids because there's some cool special effects and they might get a chuckle out of big face MODOK. But other than that, yeah, big chode mode. But other than that, that's all I got. Any final thoughts on Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania?
No, yeah, I'm pretty disappointed.
I'm sitting here wondering now why did we want to review this movie? Because
the more I think about it, the lower I'm apt to rate it. I can see the decimals ticking down as we go here.
This might be a case if you go see it again that is going to drop. I think your score is going to drop.
And I will update my my score after I see it again.
Well, look, we're not going to belabor this anymore. Tune in tomorrow night to the real show, the real deal, Nerdstalgia Live, right here on YouTube Live. For Rich, I am Tim. We'll see you tomorrow night, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, with the full crew, Donnelly, Kyle, Rich, and we're going to have a lot more fun, and we're going to have a lot more excitement and some more positivity than what Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania had brought to us. On that note, have a great night, everybody. Thanks for tuning in.